Hello, everybody. I cannot see you very well, but I know that you're out there. So as Bennett said, I'm changing the focus a little bit. We're going to look at technology and how technology affects exams, how it affects assessment, how it affects learning. So first of all, let's start with a quick history lesson for you. My field is language teaching, language assessment, English as a foreign language specifically. So this is where languages went through in the last 100 years. This, I know you're not no language teachers, but this has applicability for the rest of the talk and also for other subjects as well. So at the end of the 19th century, this is how people learned foreign languages, through something called the grammar translation method. Now this was very heavily influenced by the teaching of ancient Greek and Latin, and it was transferred into the teaching of English. So students had to translate sentences such as these, for example. The philosopher put the lower jaw of the hen. These are authentic examples, by the way. Another example. My sons have bought the mirrors of the Duke. And one more example. The cat of my aunt is more treacherous than the dog of your uncle. I'd like to meet that cat, I think. Why were people doing things in the classroom, sentences like this in the classroom? What do you think? Why sentences like these? Okay, I'll give you a little bit of a help. The focus was grammar. These people had to become very, very sure, good knowledge of grammar and good use of grammar. So they really had to become very dexterous with grammar. Thus, sentences like these, are they authentic? No, but this is what was happening in the classrooms. Moving on, in the middle of the 20th century, the audiolingual method became extremely widespread in classrooms. And this is what characterized this method. It was all about stimulus response. This was based on a learning theory called behaviorism, which meant that to learn anything, you need to develop automaticity of cognitive processes. So you got lots of questions, answers, a dialogue that you repeated and memorized. So it was very much about drills and about memorization. This is what language learning was like in classrooms at the time. Then came the communicative approach in the 1980s, which said it's not just about automaticity of processes in very restrained conditions, such as the audiolingual approach or the grammar translation method. It's about using the language in authentic situations. And then education technology. So this is really the latest big phase in the development of learning and teaching of languages, but other fields as well. Now, I have a question for you, or rather a statement that I want you to complete. Learning is blank with technology. Take about 30 seconds on your own or with the person next to you and complete the sentence with a word or a phrase. Learning is blank with technology. 30 seconds. Okay, what do you think? Let's come back together as a whole group. Any ideas? How would you complete the sentence? Shout out some possibilities. Faster. Okay, I agree with that. Learning is possibly faster with technology. Any other ideas? Ooh, I've got lots of volunteers. Let's go to this side and then I'll come back. Learning is better with technology. Can you explain a bit?
I don't necessarily agree with it, but I do.
Okay, so some arguments are made that learning is better with technology. Thank you, and one more? I'm sorry, it is enhanced with technology? Compatible with technology? Any other ideas? Personalized, struggling with technology? Further reaching, great ideas. A lot of them are very positive. I'm here, some slightly negative ones, struggling, for example. My experience with what I've read about technology, not just in language learning, but in other fields as well, is that really the jury's still out there. And I would say that technology has an expansive influence on learning and assessment, but it also has a reductive influence on learning and assessment. So what I'll do is I'll talk you through this tension the technology brings to assessment and to learning. And we'll just think together, and really there are no right answers here, but it's just I'm hoping to move you thinking forward a little bit in this. So, before we get to the expansive reductive tension, let's just think about this question. What helps people learn? Anything, not just a language. What helps people learn? 30 seconds on your own with your partner. What helps people learn? Okay, let's share some of these ideas. So what helps people learn? Give me some ideas. Feedback. Why does feedback help? Exactly. For us to learn anything, to become a master in anything, we need feedback. We need to know what we know and can do and what we don't know and what we cannot do. Okay, feedback. What else? Scaffolding? What is scaffolding? Can you explain it for all of us? Exactly. So scaffolding is about support. It's about the appropriate level of support, just like the scaffolding in a building, which is not there all the time. So scaffolding is about support. What else? Motivation. Motivated learners are better than unmotivated learners. I can say that based on my teenage son, who is very unmotivated. Definitely not a good place for learning. What else? Inspiring teachers, absolutely. That's what research shows again and again, based on thousands of studies. Inspiring teachers, motivating teachers, credible teachers really make a big difference. What else? Assessment. What kind of assessment? Thank you. I'm glad this came up. Otherwise, I would have had to say it, being from an assessment agency. Why does assessment help? Yeah, that's right. So assessment helps. It's about target. It's about telling you where you need to be. Okay, so let's just go through some ideas. You've mentioned a lot of them. Let's take a look at some that I've put down. Exposure to content. I think maybe this is too obvious to mention, but whatever you're learning, you need to be exposed to. This is quite an important point in languages, actually, because if you remember the history lesson I gave you, in some classrooms, students are not exposed to content. They're exposed to grammar rules, not to the usage of the language. So content and exposure to that content, very important. Authentic tasks, a big one in languages, but also quite important in other fields as well. Whatever you do in the classroom needs to have relevance for outside of the classroom. So translating sentences about the cat of your aunt and the dog of your uncle, not so authentic. Knowledge and skills. Knowledge is about facts. In language learning, knowledge is about knowing vocabulary, grammar, and having good pronunciation or acceptable pronunciation to be understood. Those are the building blocks. In maths, there are the building blocks. In history, it's facts about historical events. That's knowledge. Is that enough for learning? Obviously not. You need to put those building blocks into skills, into doing something with them. In languages, those skills are listening, reading, speaking, writing. So you cannot just stop with knowledge. You need to move that knowledge into skills development. Practice, deliberate practice, is essential in learning anything, becoming an expert in anything. Scaffolding, this came up already. Regular feedback, this came up. Assessment which supports learning is also essential. Motivation, personality, and so on. Okay, so let's keep these questions in mind as we now start to look at technology and the tension that technology brings to learning and assessment. All right, so let's look at this first area, theories of learning and assessment. And let's think about how technology helps. I'm going to give you examples from language learning, but translate those examples into examples you're familiar with from your own fields. So here's what the reality is of digital products that help learners with a language. This is an example from an app called Serego. Serego uses digital flashcards. Now, for those of you who have learned languages, did you use flashcards when you were learning? I did. I had a stack of them when I was learning English a long time ago in Bulgaria. I had one word on one side, the translation, and maybe an example on the other side. So flashcards are very old-fashioned, actually. These are digital flashcards, so not really much functional improvement. But what Serago do is they use something called spaced repetition. So they give you the flashcards, the digital cards to review or to use when they think you're in danger of forgetting that word. So if you get the word correct a few times, there's a longer space before you see that word again. If you're struggling with it, then there's a shorter space. So vocabulary app based on spaced repetition, there are quite a lot of these out in the language learning space. This is another example of a digital product which is available for language learners. This is an app called Quizlet. Quizlet helps teachers develop quizzes in anything they can think of, and it's a big bank of quizzes that get stored. You can use other people's quizzes as well. In this case, it's for very, very young learners, matching an image with a word. Okay, so that's another example. Here's an example from Duolingo, which is a language learning app. Have you heard of Duolingo? How many people have used Duolingo? Put up your hands. Okay, and how many of those people continued using Duolingo after 3 months? Okay, so fewer hands go up. So let's take a look at what Duolingo does. Duolingo uses, the focus is on vocabulary a lot, most of the time, and grammar. And so they might teach you a word by giving you the word. In this case, it's Spanish, the boy, translated as un niño, which is actually grammatically incorrect, but never mind. So they give you the word, and then they give you 4 images to associate with that word. So there are vocabulary tasks like these. There are also tasks which give you a sentence in the foreign language or in the first language, and they ask you to translate it by picking options that they've given you already. And then you get examples like these as well that you have to work with. Then I will eat my hat is something that you heard and you had to translate. Or this is in Russian, whose fly is it? Was another sentence. Now, does this remind you of anything? The dog, the cat of my aunt, blah, blah, blah. So this happens actually in digital products like Duolingo because they use automated generation of items. So the content is generated automatically. If you take a test, you might get a passage from Pride and Prejudice, for example, that has gaps in it. So they're basically using the internet for their content and automatically generating it. So I tried Duolingo, I played with it a little bit, I did some Spanish activities, and this is the message I got. You're now 11% fluent in Spanish. I love such precision. What does it mean? I'm not so sure. This is another example from assessment. This is an automated test, so digital. Remember, we're still talking digital. This is a speaking test example that uses a reading aloud passage. It's not speaking per se, but you have to read something, so the judgment is on your fluency of reading and pronunciation. So I've given you some examples, just a smattering of things, really. And here's what I would say those examples represent, a very atomistic approach to learning. In other words, learning is broken down into atoms because it's assumed that the more of these atoms you can join together, the more learning is going to take place. But actually, this goes against the socio-constructivist approach to learning. Somebody mentioned Vygotsky earlier. Learning is not just about breaking knowledge down into little units which are bite-sized and then one by one additively learning and acquiring mastery of those units. It's about learning developing in social interaction. It's about learning being pushed through important and interesting and valuable and rich questions. Now, these digital products don't really give examples of that. They also give they're based on a very narrow construct, which is that of knowledge. In this case, it was knowledge of vocabulary, maybe of grammar. In other examples, it might be knowledge of, let's say, historical facts, geographical facts. It might be knowledge of low-level mathematical functions. But it's not about knowledge and skills. That movement into doing something with the building blocks into skills is not there. So I would say this is probably quite a reductive influence of technology on learning and assessment, because it reduces what we're focusing on, simply because technology is not advanced enough. There are very interesting movements forward, for example, MOOCs and discussion boards, collaborative learning through digital, Skype-type conversations, but they're not in the mainstream. Okay, adaptivity, another feature of digital technology. Here's an example of what adaptivity means. You start at one place, and based on your response to the first question, whether that's right or wrong, the next question is different. So different people get different paths through an exam or through a learning task. So if you get the question correct, you get a question at that level of difficulty or higher. If you get it wrong, you get a question at a lower level of difficulty. So adaptivity is something that technology is very, very good at. Here's an example of a Cambridge product using the idea of adaptivity. This is a language course based on 6 levels, and the learning checks inside the course are based on different branching models. So the whole class does a quiz on, let's say, grammar, because based on the grammar that's been taught in the lesson. If you did quite poorly, if you only got, let's say, up to 3 out of 10 questions right, you get one set of extension activities, which might be you repeat that grammar point again in a different set of sentences. If you kind of performed around the middle, you get a different set of extension activities. Maybe you practice this point in a more controlled setting. If you did very well, in other words, you've got mastery of this, then you get a third set of extension activities, more open activity. So adaptivity built into learning products can be seen much more often. So technology gives us personalized learning pathways, really important. Is this what teachers do on a regular basis in the classroom? Yes. Good teachers use their instinct and knowledge to adapt what they do in real time. The questions they ask are based on the questions that have been answered by the students. The tasks they set are based on how the students perform. So teachers do it. Good teachers do this on a regular basis, but on a small scale. Technology allows us to do it on a much bigger scale. Adaptive tests are not new. They're quite widespread. Again, technology allows us to do this, to personalize. Somebody said learning is more personalized. That's very much the case that technology brings. So I would say there's a very expansive role that technology is playing in assessment, the idea of personalizing through adaptivity. Okay, let's look at feedback now. We said feedback is important. Let's see what technology is doing with feedback. Here's an example of a digital app that provides feedback for learners. This is in the area of language learning. It's called Write and Improve. It's one of the Cambridge products, and it's a product we're very proud of. We're proud of it because it's not just grammar and vocabulary, multiple choice questions, but it's about extended writing. It's about developing skills. So a learner can go into this app, pick a topic, and they write something on it. Then they get feedback on that piece of writing they've submitted. So this is all machine generated, and this is free, by the way. They get feedback on the overall level of their writing. Let's say it's intermediate. They get feedback on the sentences. They get feedback on the words. So 3 levels of feedback, extremely useful for language learners. So in terms of feedback, you can get differentiated levels of feedback. Instant feedback. Can teachers give instant feedback? Yes, they can, but on a much smaller scale. They cannot give instant feedback on a piece of writing for 30 students. So technology can really increase the value of feedback, I would say, through the possibility of it being instant. So this is an example of very expansive use of technology when it comes to providing feedback, which is very, very essential for learning. Marking of student work. This is kind of connected to feedback, but I couldn't resist this photo. For those of you who are teachers, you know what this means. Sunday night, you've got stacks of essays to mark for Monday morning. I loved being a teacher, but I didn't like this. So this is where technology can really help, because it can provide automated marking of student performance. And as I said, not just the easy things like grammar, vocabulary, historical facts, geography facts, and so on, but it can provide feedback on writing, really important for a language learner, but also for non-language learners who are developing their writing skills. Also, I think technology is extremely useful because it can help with a variety of marking models. Now, in assessment, how you mark a piece of writing is really important because human beings are usually the markers and they introduce subjectivity to this process. Human beings don't agree because they're complex in their thinking. It doesn't mean they're wrong if they disagree, but there's some subjectivity. So technology can allow human marking and machine marking to be combined. That is a fantastic combination. Technology can allow something like comparative judgment models to be employed. Let's say instead of looking at a piece of writing and giving it a number based on a scale, you can look at two pieces of writing and decide which one is better. Technology can do this much better than teachers can. So it helps to reduce subjectivity and it helps to increase the richness of what you bring because the machine is accurate. This is what machines do. They always apply the same algorithm. Humans are more subjective. Combining the two reduces subjectivity. So I would say there's an expansive role that technology brings to marking here. But also, I would say it's reductive, because if we're relying just on the machine doing the marking, we're limited in what information the machine can provide. The machine is limited by the algorithm. To give you an example from language testing, for example, a machine can give feedback on a piece of writing in terms of sentence richness or the breadth of vocabulary in terms of sentence structure, but it cannot give feedback on organization of the essay, developing ideas, going off topic. That's difficult actually for the machine to pick up. So if we're just relying on the machine doing the marking, then that's a reductive influence. Combining the machine and the human, extremely expansive in terms of what it can do. Data. You can't talk about digital without talking about data. So what happens? I've given you two images here, because when we think of data, we think of the one with the zeros and fives and twos, the fluorescent numbers. Digital data, but actually teachers have a lot of data as well. It's just that it's on a much smaller scale. So technology can really add value when it comes to data, as long as it's combined with the human data that teachers bring as well. So technology can help with record keeping. It is very, very good at containing a lot of information into a bank. So it can take the burden of teachers in that way. Technology is very good at looking at data and identifying trends. It can say what learning progression a student is going through, whether they're advancing, whether they're plateauing. It's very, very good at looking at trends in classes, in schools, on a national level as well. It can quantify a lot of things. Maybe it quantifies things which are not easy to quantify or things which are too complex, but it can reduce a behavior to numbers. So I would say there's an expansive role that technology plays here, but also reductive. If we're relying on that quantification as the only source of information for teachers and we're not listening to what the teacher's human judgment is telling us, then I think that's wrong. So technology can really add value in addition to the teacher judgment. And here's a quote from José Ferreira, who is the chief executive of a company called Newton. Maybe you've probably heard of Newton. They're a very well-respected, well-known company which offers adaptive learning. Here's what he said. Now, his company lives on data. It thrives on data. It needs data to survive. Here's what he was asked. Will data replace teachers? And here's what he said. It won't. Teachers and data do totally different things. Data is only additive, like X-rays in hospitals and instant replay in sports. Data adds concrete information to a teacher's observations and intuition, but it will never replace experience, personal relationships, and cultural understanding. So again, symbiosis between data, technology, and teachers. Okay, so I'm going to summarize now in 3 slides some of the ideas I've talked about. And I want to do it in three categories, in 3 sections. One is, what can teachers do that technology can't? What can both teachers and technology do? And what can technology do that teachers can't? I would love to make this a discussion, but because I only have 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 41 seconds. I'm just going to talk you through it. But, questions for you to take away with you beyond this talk. So, teachers can, technology can't. Social learning. This is what learning is about. It's about exchanging ideas, developing learning through interaction, through being asked good questions, which move your thinking forward. Machines cannot do this, maybe not yet. So social learning is about interaction, discussion, collaboration. That's what machines cannot bring to assessment or to learning. Teachers can also develop higher order thinking skills, and this phrase came up a few times, I think in Michael's talk, and then in Simon's and Martin's talk. Higher order thinking skills are opposed to lower order thinking skills. Lower order thinking skills are skills such as understanding, memorizing. Higher order thinking skills are about evaluating, putting something into practice, critiquing something. So it's about being a critical user of the content you have. Machines cannot do this. Teachers can with well-chosen questions. Teachers can focus on skills and application of knowledge. Machines can really just focus on knowledge, checking that knowledge has been acquired. And also, teachers can create positive learning climates. They can focus on interpersonal skills in the classroom. Technology can't. It's very limited to this. Even though my kids tell me their friends online are just as good as talking to their friends in the same room, but that's the case. Technology is limited there. What can both technology and teachers do? Focus on knowledge. In fact, if technology can do it, better to leave it to the technology. Leave time in the classroom for the things technology cannot do, such as higher order thinking skills, social learning, interaction, communication, discussion. So if technology can do something, I think it is not good use of teachers' time to be focusing on that thing. That should be left to the technology to do. Adaptive learning, as we talked, both teachers and machines can do it. Teachers on a much smaller scale. Both can mark student work, so if the machine can take some of that burden off teachers, the machine should. Whenever I've talked about this idea to teachers, the aha moment has been so obvious, and they've said, yes, so next time I give a student an essay to my students, I'm going to say, put it through write and improve before I say it. So they need to work on 2 drafts. So they develop the idea of process writing as well. Or they might ask their students to get their essay analyzed by machine, and then they just add, the teacher marks it as well, but focusing on different aspects of that writing. So there can be very useful division of labor there. Record keeping, we mentioned that, feedback, and motivation. Young people learn in the digital age. This is part of their life. They've got a machine in their pocket that is magical. It does everything. It connects them to their friends. It gives them content. They need this because their classroom should not be divorced too much from what happens in their real life. So technology increases motivation as well. Okay, what can technology do that teachers cannot? There are some things. Big data. Technology can accumulate banks of data which can be then used to support teacher decisions. Ongoing assessment. We live in a culture still, unfortunately, where there's a division between formative and summative, and where there's a learn, teach, then you stop and you test. But I think technology can really integrate assessment and learning in a much more meaningful way, because assessment, and by assessment I don't mean a summative test, I mean learning checks. That can be ongoing, providing evidence for the teacher then to base their next lesson plan on. Instant feedback, very, very useful to have that feedback instantly on what you can and cannot do. 24/7 global access. No teacher would like to be accessible 24/7 all the time. Not a single teacher would like this. Technology can take this off. Technology can avoid bias, fatigue, and burnout. This is maybe obvious, it's worth repeating, reminding ourselves. We're complex human beings, we can do things machines cannot do, but we carry biases, consciously or unconsciously, because of our complexity. Machines are not biased, except for the philosophy that the algorithm was built on, but that's a separate question. Okay, so just to sum up, based on what I've talked about, technology, digital, where are we going in terms of learning and assessment? These are just some ideas. There are many, many more, but just something to get you thinking. I think much more integration of learning and assessment, that division of what happens in the classroom and then what happens in the test room, I think will be blurred much more. So there'll be much more integration of assessment being ongoing throughout the learning process.